think that we can get started. Hi, my name is Karen Plater, and I'm Associate Secretary for Stewardship and Plan Giving for the Presbyterian Church in Canada. And we'll just go over a few things. I'm just going to get my screen sharing again. Here we go. Okay. Okay, Maggie, does that all look good? Okay, great. Okay, welcome. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. My intention is that I've got some things to talk about starting and doing stewardship in your congregation, and then open up for a chance for any questions that you have and discussion. So just for a little bit of protocol, we're going to stay muted. You can use the Q&A. I should have updated the slide actually. Now that we've moved to Teams, the Q&A to ask any questions. Maggie is going to be monitoring it and asking the questions probably mostly at the end of the presentation, but if she gets a chance, she might ask something as we go along. So when you ask a question, be sure to make a clue or reference to what it's referring to, rather than just saying, oh, I agree. We won't necessarily know at what point you agreed to. So you could say, I agree, stewardship involves everyone, tell me more, or something like that. There will be an opportunity to unmute at the end for people who want to ask a question verbally or for us to have a little deeper discussion. The recording and the slides will be available at presbyterian.ca/webinars, and I'll send an email out as well with the links. So feel free to share it around, to show it to your stewardship committee or to your session or to whomever that you want to share this information with. And we'll just start the recording at my next slide, not at these ones with all of the sort of housekeeping. All right. So I think then I'm just going to go ahead. The theme today and for the next 4 sessions is when we put our gifts into God's hands, God does remarkable things. And I just want to share some stewardship ideas that you can use to create a stewardship plan for your congregation. I'm Karen Plater. I've worked at the Presbyterian Church in Canada for the past 29 years, the first 11 as the communications coordinator for Presbyterian World Service and Development, and the past 18 helping congregations in congregational stewardship, as well as promoting and talking about gifts to Presbyterian sharing. And for that part, I want to say that this webinar and all the webinars that are done by the Presbyterian Church in Canada are a result of your gifts to Presbyterian sharing, and is part of our role to equip congregations in mission and stewardship and Christian education and justice work. So thank you for the gifts that come from your congregations, as well as some of you individually. As we start, I want to begin with an acknowledgement that the land that congregations across Canada worship and gather on are part of the traditional territories of various and different Indigenous peoples. The National Office land is on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Petun, Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit Indigenous peoples. We honor the people who were first here and note that we are on a journey of healing and reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, particularly as a result of colonization and the residential schools of which our church was a part. All right, just to give you an overview of the 4 weeks that we are going to be talking about stewardship. Today is going to be a little bit more general conversation about good stewardship. Next week, we're going to give you specific strategies in asking people to give money as part of stewardship. And in week 3, we'll look at some strategies for sustaining ministry into the future. And week 4, we'll really explore how do we say thank you for the gifts that people have given, whether it's financial, their time, or their talent. let's begin. First of all, what do we mean when we talk about stewardship? Well, I'm sure it brings up ideas for many of you, and if not for you, I can guarantee for people in your congregation about what they think when they hear stewardship, or what they think about when they hear we're going to have a stewardship week, or a stewardship session, or a stewardship committee. I can pretty much guarantee that they're going to think, oh, this is about asking for money. It's about presenting the church budget. We're going to hear that we're behind and people need to give, and that this is the primary role of stewardship. But really, stewardship's a really robust concept and idea. And we see it both in our culture and communities today, in the secular world, as well as an idea that we embrace in Christianity. Stewardship is very much about the management of resources on behalf of someone else. And so, biblically and theologically, when we think of stewardship in our Christian journey and walk, we think that everything belongs to God and that we are managing those resources, particularly the resources God has given us. But as congregations, the resources people have entrusted us to participate in God's mission on behalf of either the donors or the givers or on behalf of God. So I think it's really important that we keep that as a focus of what we're doing and why we're doing it. The other idea, if you look up in the dictionary, concept of stewardship and stewards are people who attend to the needs of others, which I think also can fit very well in our biblical understanding and the role of what the stewardship is. Sometimes when I'm out talking to congregations, afterwards I get asked questions. And sometimes at the end of a service, somebody came up to me and they said, "Oh, I was really glad to hear the sermon on stewardship and you began to explain it because I really only knew a steward when I first came to Canada, is that those were the people on the plane who helped look after me. They were the stewards." And I said, yes, they were helping attend to your needs and helping look after you. That is what a steward is. Sometimes we say a steward is the person responsible for the supplies and arrangements of an event. It can be looking after the environment on the behalf of others and for others to use as well. So you'll see the word stewardship come up a lot in environmental groups. They talk about looking after our lakes and our parks and our common ground so that we can all enjoy it. People may be familiar with the word and concept of stewardship if they've sat on a board, either for a business where they're stewarding shares on behalf of the people who own shares in the business, or for who sit on a nonprofit. You're stewarding the gifts that people have given to the nonprofit and intend them to be used in a particular way. So it's sort of important for us to just know what the word steward means and evokes when we begin to explore and dive into this word deeper. Anyone who's been to any of my sermons before will know that I often talk about the word economos. And this is the Greek word in the Bible that refers to a steward, or as we often interpret it, to be a steward. And in the Bible, there's examples of both good stewards and bad stewards. But the steward, and particularly a good steward, is the one who knows the overall plan for an estate, the owner's greatest, deepest intentions and greatest hopes. And I think that's really good because if we want to be good stewards, it's all about knowing the overall plan that God has for God's world. And really, stewardship is inviting us to live out the will of God as revealed in Scripture and the life of Jesus. So stewardship is really about putting our faith into action. It's definitely a spiritual discipline. And it's something that the church and the whole church is involved in. So in that sense, often when I'm talking about stewardship, I'm like, this should be the best and most exciting committee that we have in the church. Now, that said, if we define stewardship as everything and putting faith into action, it can also sort of dilute it a little bit because people on the stewardship committee, and I've been asked this when I've done workshops, will say, all right, but what's our role? what can we specifically do when we're part of a stewardship committee? And I think it's a really good question, and something that we can explore more. So let me give you a few thoughts about stewardship and the role I think a stewardship committee can play in the church. First of all, it's important to know that stewardship is about two things. One is how we as individuals use the gifts that God has given us. So we can teach and talk about stewardship when we're talking and learning as Christians how we live our lives. We can say, look at the gifts you've been given. We've all been given time, talent, the ability to pray. Most of us have been given some type of resources that we live off of and have choice about what we can do with them. So that asks questions about what do we do with the time and the talents and the treasures that God has given us as individuals. And that can be part of the stewardship committee's role, just to help people dive into these questions and really explore it. But then stewardship is also in the church about how we as a congregation, as a ministry or mission, as the church, are using those gifts that people have given to God through us. When people give in the offering plate, they aren't thinking that I'm giving so just to this church. It's a very spiritual thing, and we need to know that, and that they're wanting to participate in God's mission. And if they give financial resources, or if they give time to serve on a program or to a committee or to participate in a mission, that is part of them participating in God's mission. So it's really important we focus on that. And we also see the distinguishes or these two different elements of stewardship, because there'll be different strategies that we decide to employ when we look at them. So keep this in mind, and then I want you to think that stewardship is not about giving to a church or a ministry or a mission budget. I think that's the sort of typical thing that we've often used in churches just to talk about stewardship. And so as soon as people hear stewardship, they think, oh, it's budget time, we're going to talk about money. But it is about responding to the call of God in our lives with all our gifts. And really the time, treasure, and talent that we heard about in the Sunday school when we were growing up is just as applicable today as now. And so I'm going to explore a few different ways in all of these that we can do. Now, as soon as if I'm doing a workshop in a church, as soon as I get there, one of the questions inevitably that gets asked at the very beginning is, do we tithe or do we not tithe? And it kind of makes me laugh. And sometimes it's even more detailed. And is it tithe today? Is it 10%, which tithe means 10 or 10%? Or do we have a modern day tithe now where it's 5% because we pay taxes, or 7%? Or what if I want to give more than a tithe? What if I feel like giving 15 or 20%? So that can be that question. And then it also could be, and also, is a tithe before tax income or after tax income? These are all good questions, all great questions to explore together as you learn about stewardship and as you dive into how and why God teaches us to give. But the question about to tithe or not to tithe is a very technical question, and it doesn't get into the heart of what God is really teaching. And what I want people to do, or what I'd like to see stewardship committees do, is to take this idea and to really dive in behind what it means, what God has taught, and what the meaning is behind God's teaching when we look at things to give. Really, the tithe in the Old Testament was 10% of agriculture, the produce from farms. So it could be your crops, it could be the animals. They were encouraged to give the best of this. They gave it to the offering, but it was very specific to producers, agricultural producers. There was also times where they taught about giving offering, and offerings were given at times of celebration and special times of the year that everybody would participate in as well. And I think we can look at all of those and say, what is it? What's the intention behind it? What was God trying to do? And as I've done that, and I'm just going to share from 18 years looking particularly at stewardship issues, here's some of the lessons that I have learned both by listening to congregations and by talking with my ecumenical colleagues about this, and then reading the books that people have read. And so here's my Coles Note versions about stewardship. First of all, it's really important to choose wisely the language we use when talking about stewardship, particularly financial stewardship, but not always. But we want to make sure the language reflects our theology. So why do you say this? Well, I am sure that some of you have heard in congregations, and I know I've heard it over the years in my conversations, what we call scarcity language. So people have looked at, for example, the deficit. A deficit is scarcity language. A deficit means there's not enough money to cover the expenses that are coming in. And so when we say, oh no, our church is in a deficit, or we've planned a deficit budget, it's like we've planned already for not enough money to come in. Now, there may be reasons that we have done this. Maybe we've adapted an aspirational budget because we really think the people of God can rise to the occasion. And so we have a deficit budget. But when you say deficit budget, people hear scarcity. Or maybe at year end, you have a deficit. The budget hasn't met the expenses, hasn't actually met the expenses. And then you have to find the resources from somewhere else. Sometimes there's endowment funds that allow ministry to go with a deficit budget because there's gifts from past generations. But we just have to think about, what does it mean when we say this? When we say givings were less than last year? First of all, I think it's hard for everyone, whether you're a session member, whether you're part of the stewardship committee, whether you're a church of the whether you're a member of the congregation. When you hear the scarcity language, it assumes that everyone is already giving what they can. And it also makes you feel that all we can do is make cuts, particularly on ministry programs and ministry that is outside of the congregation. But you can say, but it's such a practical thing. It's such a reality today that people are giving less, either than last year, or we have less people giving, or we have set a budget and in good faith, and we're not quite meeting it. How can we not use scarcity language when it's a reality we're facing? Well, what we want to do is just kind of share the same information without getting into the feeling of scarcity. And I'm going to come up with some ideas for that too. But what we want to do is embrace what we call an abundance language. And if you looked through stewardship material or information on giving, you'd find this. And I think there's a book called Abundance, Creating a Culture of Generosity. It was produced in 2020 and written by Michael Ward. And I love this sentence from it. I believe that abundance is a mindset and not a condition of wealth. Abundance is recognizing that the one who provides us with everything, and recognizing that it is not only enough, but enough to share. So really what we want to do is, rather than saying we have a deficit or people have given less than the year before, let's celebrate the gifts that people have given. And then we can say, and we've got dreams and plans to do even more mission and ministry. And we invite you to give to make those dreams and plans become reality. So we're inviting people to give, if we're in a deficit situation, to be part of God's mission. And we do it, and we see the gifts that they have already given, and we recognize and celebrate those. Sometimes we say when there's not enough, I think that the people who have given must think, but I give every week. How can there not be enough? And it can be, well, that's not great planning on behalf of the finance committee or the session or whoever's making the decisions, because, we're giving as much as we can. So it just changes the language and it changes the mindset. It invites people to give and be part of something exciting rather than to feel that they haven't done enough. All right. I can do a whole session on that type of language and doing scarcity and abundance. And I'm just wanting to plant the seeds and ideas right now because as we do our stewardship plans and look at programs we want to get into, I want you to think about, are we using abundance language? Are we inviting people to participate in something exciting? Something else, I think there's lots of scripture in particularly Second Corinthians. It talks about Paul collecting offerings and lots of ideas and themes we can take out from that if you want to explore more the idea of giving and generosity and what it means. But in all of that scripture, you'll read multiple times that he talks again and again about the grace of God. And it is about grace. It's about us participating in God's grace, and it's about God seeing us with grace and sharing grace and loving us no matter who we are and however we come to participate and be part of God's community. And that's something that I think we have to be aware of as well, because I think sometimes when we have stewardship programs or do teaching on stewardship and we talk about being a good steward and that, some people, they come to the church and they're like, oh, I can never do that. Or how can I be part of ministry? I don't know how to give. I don't have any resources. We want everyone to say, come as you are, participate as you are. You're welcome to be part of God's mission, and we will take your gifts, whatever they are, and we will appreciate them. A great little book written by Sean Mitchell and Millie Snyder, Gracious Stewardship. You can find it on Amazon or wherever you find your books. It's not very big, and it's got lots of theology about talking about how to develop stewardship programs that are filled with grace. And so I loved this quote: God loves those who give generously and those who don't give at all. God welcomes those who are consistent and faithful and those who are impulsive and erratic. God forgives the sinful and the self-righteous. And there's a great, they really look at the parable of the prodigal son, and they look at both the prodigal son who sort of left God's way and ran away with the inheritance and splurged it all, as well as the good son who stayed at home and was working for the father, but then felt a little resentment when the prodigal came back home. And so I think it's just such a great book, the way that it explores that, and it looks at the way we sometimes in the church talk about money and the way that it can make people feel. So again, the programs, whatever we do in our stewardship committee, is to know it's about joy. I love this is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. Give as you've made up your mind, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And I can say I've been the recipient of gifts, and I know when somebody has given reluctantly and hasn't really wanted to give. And I know when somebody has given cheerfully without conditions and it has given them joy. And when it's done that way, giving and receiving are both joyful experiences. Oh, that comes out of Corinthians as well. I thought I had the scripture verse there somewhere. All right. And then, I mean, Corinthians is just so deep with all of these issues. The other thing that we want to encourage and remind people, and it sort of helps us to remember this when we're also, if we're asking or encouraging gifts, that we're only asking people to give from what they have. So I sometimes get asked by people who say, well, we're really, we don't want to we already ask for so much of people in the congregation. And we know that there's so many people, seniors, students who are on fixed incomes, and they just, the cost of living is so high today. We just feel bad asking them to give. And I just want to remind them that God teaches, and it's in the Bible, that the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. This isn't about keeping up with the Smiths. It's not about looking to the person sitting in the pew next to you and saying, well, how much are you giving? And thinking, well, I need to give what they're giving. It's looking and saying, what has God given me now? in this time, and what can I give back? So sometimes then if we ever go back to that tithing conversation, I say, well, I think sometimes the principle behind the tithing is that God encourages to give intentionally and faithfully and make a decision about what we give. If I haven't been giving anything to the church and don't have that as part of my practice, it can be a huge step. I could say, well, maybe I could give 1% of my income or 2%, and I could start to give there. And I can look at my expenses and my income, and I can decide, here are my needs. If my needs absolutely are outweighing the income coming in, if I'm going into debt every month, then be at peace. It's not your time to give a financial gift, or it may not be your time to give a financial gift. Maybe you can give the gift of prayer. You can give a gift of time. Maybe in the years to come, you're going to get out of that debt and be on top, and then you're going to say, "Oh, I've got wants now that I can cover as well as needs. Well, what do I want to do? I'd like to give some of this back to the church." So that's what it's about. We're only encouraging people to give, and this is both from a congregational viewpoint and our own, to give what God has given. If we go through rough times and we feel like it's so hard, then we need to be at peace and just accept the grace God has given us, accept the grace that's in the church, and accept that we are still worthy. All right. And then the other thing I want to say is that it's about generosity. This again comes from the creating a culture of generosity. And sometimes people say, should the stewardship committee be the generosity committee? Because often it's about encouraging and nurturing generosity. And so I loved this quote, which is, the generous are the ones who have learned that the joy of material wealth is the ability to share it with others for the common good. And I love this. I wish some people would share this more, with no expectation of receiving anything in return. And I'll say, when I worked for PWS&D in relief and development, this idea of sharing our gifts with no expectation of anything in return was really important to me. There was a term that we used called rice Christians. It came out of India, where people would convert to Christianity because they thought it would get them a bag of rice. And in fact, it may have gotten them a bag of rice. It wasn't like it was, yeah, that's what, if you became a Christian, here, you're going to get the rice. But that's not what we're trying to do. We want to say, you're hungry. We want to feed you because you're hungry. We have no expectation of anything in return, but we're doing it out of love. And I think it's really important, and so important today, this idea of unconditional love. But I want to say, you don't need to be rich to give. Working in relief and development too, I worked around the world, and I participated in worship services in some of the poorest communities in the world. And there was often offering times that would be rich and filled with music and song. And people would bring their offering. They would dance up to the front of the church, and they'd put their offering. There'd be a sort of bag you could put your offering in. And people wouldn't know. They wouldn't know if you dropped some money in or some coins. Maybe you went up and you gave your time. Maybe you gave your prayers. But anyone could participate. And I will say that at the end of the service, there was always money in the offering plate, and that money was then used to participate in God's mission and ministry. And it's important to know that when we pool our gifts, God does and can do incredible things. So if we went to back to that question, to tithe or not to tithe, it depends. There's a lot of things to explore if you want to tackle this question in a Bible study or a sermon. Go really deep and say and make decisions. All right. So that's the language, and that's what I want to. Oh, and I'm just going to check my time. Okay, 2:30. This is good. I've got about 10 minutes worth of material, and then I'm going to open up for your questions and discussions. So be thinking about those. We used to do a conference called Stewards by Design, and Dr. Kenan Callahan, who's written many, many books about stewardship, had this saying, money follows mission. And so for a congregation, it's very important for us to keep our eye on that, the mission. If we're going to ask people to give gifts to the church, and if we're going to steward those gifts, we need to know how are those gifts participating in God's mission. I think that this is it's a little book called The Spirituality of Fundraising, written by Henry Nouwen. And it is just great for encouraging people who are doing fundraising in the church, and to say how fundraising is part of mission and ministry as much as running a children's program or preaching a sermon or leading a Bible study. Because when you are participating in fundraising, you're inviting people to invest themselves through the resources God has given them. There's that key. It's from what God has given. This could be energy, prayers, and money to the work that God has called us to do. So, yeah, just sort of what we're doing when we're inviting people to give. Now, as a congregation, when we're participating in God's mission, I think it's important for us to figure out what's our niche. What's the difference that our church is doing? Because God's mission is massive. And really, again, if you don't sort of know what you're doing, it feels too big and overwhelming. So you have to say, as congregations, here is the difference that our congregation, with the gifts we've been given, and that includes the people, it includes the buildings and or property that you own, and it includes the financial resources that you have to steward. Well, what's the difference we are going to make? And you need to define that. So when you're looking at gifts that people are giving to the church, and I think let's talk about the ones of time and talent. We want to ask questions like, how do we allocate time spent in our building or property? Is it being used just 1 day a week for a worship service? Is it used 2 to 3 days a week? How much is it being used for worship, for serving the community, for reaching out to young people, for providing a place to gather for people who are broken and wounded? What is the building and our property? How is it being used? How much time are we spending and allocating, and how to the programs that we're running? So what are we doing, and what does it say about who we are? We can ask, how much time do we give to worship, discipleship programs, committee oversight work, outreach to our community, and to participating in mission, local, national, and international? It's really important because sometimes I think, and particularly in Presbyterian congregations, we can spend a lot of time in committee work. And we have to be sure that we want to balance this out, have the balance of our committee work, which is providing oversight and doing the planning, with the actual work that we are doing to reach out to our community. And how do we invite people to give their time in worship and discipleship programs? Do we ask them to participate? Invite them to participate, because I think that's why most of us go to church. We want to participate in God's mission. So you can look at this for time. It's very similar questions. How are we asking our volunteers to use their talents? Are they having fun doing it? And or is it meaningful? I was talking at a congregation not too long ago, and we were talking about fun. I said, there's a certain energy that comes when people are having fun together. And it doesn't have to mean fun in the way we always think of it, because you can run, for example, a grief group, and it can be very meaningful and very challenging and very hard and lots of ups and downs. And you can think, well, was that fun? Well, it was meaningful, and there brought a lot of meaning. And chances are, from one who's participated in and knows people, they probably have had some fun and some laughs as they have dealt with and learned how to deal with grief. So again, what does it say about who we as a church are by what we're asking our volunteers to do, and how much are they using their time and their talent to participate in the programs we do? And then it's the same when we talk about the money. We can ask all of these similar questions. We can also think about, how do we talk about money? How do we talk about money as a church? Are we, What are we doing with our gifts? And are we giving away money as well as using money to serve the congregation and serve the community? So one thing that I can do, and the reason that I started with those questions is I think if you don't know the answers to those questions, this is an important exercise for your stewardship committee to do and questions for them to answer when they're getting together right at the very beginning of the year. And an exercise you can do is what we call a narrative budget. And when I say budget, I'm talking about budget not only of money, but of time and talent as well. But a narrative budget will take all the costs, the ministry descriptions, your plans, and look at them and allocate them to some impact that you're having with the gifts. And there is a whole webinar on narrative budgets on the PCC website that you can go back and watch. But it would end up having something that looks like this. And it's not, I wouldn't say it's easy. It takes time to develop and to allocate the time. But once you've done it 1 year, it becomes easier as it goes on. But the idea is that you're able to take the budget, both the money budget and your time and the building use budget, and you can say by giving them values, this is how much time, this is how much we spend in worship. So you sort of get it and you can develop a pie chart like this. And honestly, this one, I probably put too many pieces of the pie in the chart. For example, maybe it'd be more useful, the story, to put children and youth together and then say that, okay, that's 18%. But I'd say look at the reports that you have, look at your annual general reports, say what is it that we're doing and how can we group them together in categories that are useful for us. And the point is that we don't want to, when we say we give to a congregation, if you're giving financial gifts, that it's going to pay for the insurance and the heating and the minister's salary and the minister's insurance and the presbytery assessment and the synod assessment and the Presbyterian sharing allocation. What we want to say is that when you give a gift, 30% of it goes to worship and 15% goes to community care and 7% goes to evangelism. And then you can develop stories, collect the stories that back up these numbers and share them with the church. So I think this is a really good role. This is great for session. It's great to share at your annual general meeting. Some people I know have moved towards the narrative budget and they'll have a line item budget that here we have available for you if you're interested. Anyone who wants a copy, come and pick it up. But do the presentation on your narrative budget and back it up with those stories and numbers, with how many groups are using your facility and how many volunteers you have and how many hours they're spending doing that volunteer work, and how those volunteer hours really match or multiply the gifts that are given through the worship, through the offering plate. Because once you do this, this can become some of the roles of your stewardship community. First of all, you can look at and think about how can we change our language? How can we make sure our language is reflecting our theology? What's a giving plan we can develop? And that's coming up in the next 2 weeks. I'm going to look at giving plans for annual and special projects as well as endowment funds. We're going to gather together and share the stories, which probably means you need to talk to your minister, your session, church staff, any volunteers. I should have put church staff and volunteers, and the finance, mission, discipleship, Christian education, any groups that you have in your church who are doing this. You're going to gather their stories and you're going to put them and connect them to that pie chart that you've developed. You're going to make it easy to give, and I'll talk about that when I'm talking about the giving plan next week. Then you're going to report back the impact. You're going to share the stories about what God is doing through your church, and you're going to remember to say thank you. And those are reporting back and saying thank you. We're going to look at in the last week. Now, some of you may, and this is my second last, this is my second last slide are going to say, okay, so this is all the ideas, but practically, how can we do this? One is to run a stewardship program, run it all year round, and pick a theme and go with it and help it connect to what you want to do. So I'm happy and I invite you to, for example, use the theme that I have used for this presentation. When we put our gifts into God's hands, God does remarkable things. I already talked to a church and they said, we really like that. We're going to use that as our stewardship theme for the next year, for the next couple of years. It could be a 3-year theme, a 5-year theme. We're using that often when we talk about gifts to Presbyterian sharing and gifts to PWS&D. I think it's exciting to see what God does with the gifts that we give. There is also a program, and this is done yearly, produced by the Center for Faith and Giving. And they are connected to the Disciples in Christ Church in the US. And they used to be a member of the Ecumenical Stewardship Center, which we were also a member, but unfortunately it closed during COVID. Now, the Ecumenical Stewardship Center used to produce this program, or a stewardship program, every year. And it's an annual program. It goes through the whole year and just looks at the scriptures and where can you invite people to see stewardship themes, whether it's giving their talents, giving money, or giving of their time. So their theme for 2025 is Dreaming God's Dream. And they have developed resources that include 8 complete worship services, hymn suggestions, sermon starters, from 8 different authors, and plus additional Bible study material for children, youth, and adults. And you can find the link here. I'm going to follow up with, when I send out the recording, I'm going to include this link in it. And if you use the coupon 25 STMPCC, so stewardship mission PCC. If you use that coupon when you check out, the price is going to drop down to 0. So anyone who wants to use this can get it free of charge for their congregation. So this program is all laid out. They usually produce a new program in January of every year. So there will be a coupon that'll be 26 STMPCC if you're looking in January. But I think you can also just take the material from this year and then use it throughout the whole year from September until January. I find that a new program launching in January is hard. I feel like in our churches, a year tends to run September to June. So I just encourage people, because it's not really, they do tie it a little bit to lectionary, but you can use the themes any time of the year. So that it's got, everything, bulletin inserts, ideas. It's a canned program that you're welcome to use. There's other organizations that provide programs. You can look for them, find something that suits your organization. The past programs from the Center for Faith and Giving and the ESC are all on this website as well, and you can use those free of charge. So it's only the most current program that you need to pay for. Okay, so as you think about implementing change, just begin to talk through your committees. What are our fears? And what's the cost if we don't change? And hopefully something has sparked an idea. I'm happy to talk with any of these now in the question and answer time, or to have one-on-one conversations with you or your session. These days we can set up electronic conversations easily, and I have also gone to people and places and happy to talk with you as much as I can. As I said, next week, we're going to look at ways of funding ministry. We're going to look at ways to ask and how to ask for the offering plate, for special projects. And then in week 3, we'll look particularly at endowment and legacy funds and grants and ways that they can help fund ministry. All right, that's it. Phew. Okay. That was 46 minutes, so I'm opening up for questions and conversation now.
And we don't have anything on the Q&A, so if anyone wants to speak, you can raise your hand or just let us know, and then you can unmute yourself.
And I'll stop sharing so it feels like we're having a conversation. There we go. No, stunned silence, right? I always try to say too much. Oh, I see Ruby. Okay, Ruby, go ahead.
Hey, Karen. So having a background in finance and trying to, rein that spending sprees that some people tend to go on, trying to rein that in so that you're mitigating any risks that might come to the church. You're trying to, help them stay on track and things like that, but yet you have a deficit budget that you approve, and that you have legacy funds that can cover it, so you have whatever different ministries that you want to provide to. How do you find that balance, though, as a finance person, to say, I understand the stewardship piece of it, I understand that these are the things we want to do in our community and outwards, but how do you then say to them, okay, it's good to have dreams, it's good to have a plan, but in my teachings in my other world life here, it's like, if you fail to plan, then plan to fail. So it's trying to get them to come, to the table with a plan that looks at all those mitigating factors that you can say, okay, if we've mitigated as much as we can still do all these things, but still be conservative in what we're actually spending, instead of pinching pennies here and letting dollars fly out the door over here. How do you find that balance?
Absolutely. And if anyone finds the perfect balance, then great. I'm inviting you to come and do a webinar as well. But I'm going to say it is a discernment that you need to do prayerfully, and you need to know your congregation. So I'll share with you a few strategies that I've heard people, particularly when they're in a time of decline. So one is to not think that we have to, or that we even can do everything that we have previously done. And so that is, I think it's easy for churches. Sometimes we look at the budget from last year and we're going to roll over, and it's going to be the same budget from last year, except maybe some increases. And we're going to do all of the same things. So I think one is pulling back and prayerfully and intentionally doing the things that you think have the most value and are going to achieve your mission and participating in God's mission, and then make those decisions about what you're going to do based on that. Now, I'll give a very practical example because that's all very theoretical and it sounds nice. So I was in a stewardship conference last year, and we were asked a very similar question. And the woman who was giving the presentation said in her church, they were facing a deficit, and it was quite significant. They had some people die, and so they knew that they couldn't do the budget. They were pretty sure they couldn't do the budget that they had normally passed. So they looked at, first of all, the same way that we all look. What are the needs? What do we absolutely have to pay for? So, if we're going to have a full-time minister or part-time minister, we have the minister's salary. We have the heating, the insurance, the utilities for the building. So the same as we have or you might do personally, whittle that down to these are the needs in order to keep this church open that we have to do. Well, then you have to ask, can we cover these needs? And this is where we want to cover the needs from, we need to cover the needs, and from our undesignated gifts, from our the offering plate, okay? You're going to find as you do that, oh, well, we've taken out a lot of things that make us the church, right? You're saying the ministry budget, the children's budget, the Christian education budget, the mission and outreach budget. Okay, so then you need to say, well, how are we going to fund those? And so this one church did, they took all the needs, they kept a little bit of program, for the worship so that they had, and so that they could continue to do the basics. I would say like Bible studies and worship, that's all part of those needs. But then they said, well, we actually, from what we did last year and knowing that these people had died, we think we can cover the bare bones budget with the offering. But what we're going to do is we're not going to put any undesignated gifts to mission. But we don't want to not do mission because mission is important in our church. And so what they said was that even as we pass our budget at the AGM, this very bare bones basic budget, we are going to commit as a group and a community to raising 10% of our budget that we have passed to do mission, that is mission outreach into the local community and international. And so they said, okay, so, and I'm just going to say, they said that we're going to raise 12,000 in the year. And their idea was that we want to keep it in chunks that are manageable. So we're going to raise 1,000 extra over and above what we're getting through our offerings plates. We're going to do pie dinners. We're going to encourage people to give, have special offerings. We're going to do this. We're going to invite people from the community who don't come to church an opportunity to participate with us in this mission, because we're raising money for the food bank, or we're raising money for the water project in Malawi. And we are going to talk to people who might be interested in this and encourage them to give as well. And they had some failures. They found that they got to about March and they hadn't raised any money. And they said, well, so much for our $1,000 a month. But they also said, well, there's a fair in the summer that we have participated in as a church, and we're going to see if we put a booth up in this fair, how much we can raise during that fair. And they did it, and they were intentional about how they did it. They had a lot of fun doing it. They were talking about mission. They were engaging and inviting people to give, and they raised $6,000 in the summertime. So then they were like, okay, we've got 4 months to raise the balance. Anyway, by being intentional, they raised over 20% of their budget to participate in mission, and everyone felt good about it. And it also helped to encourage people to come to the church and give through the offering. This is not to say it will work for everyone, but the point is to try and think outside the box and think, how can we use people's time and money and energy to do it? And I don't like fundraising projects for church. Like, you can say fundraising for the sake of fundraising. I like it if it builds community, if it participates in God's mission, if it finds ways to share the excitement about caring for one another, if it's inviting people to give, and it also recognizes that people can give in different amounts. So, for example, when there is a fundraising concert, you can sell tickets to the fundraising, $10 a ticket, or you can have an open offering that we are raising funds here. Please give as you are able. More and more I hear that people will raise more by having a free will offering than they will by selling the tickets. So that is part. It's not, it is a fine line. You need to do it prayerfully. You need to say who's gifted in this, who's got energy to do it. And we don't do it only for raising money sake. Like, it's because we are a church wanting to participate in mission. This is why we're putting our energy into this. And then you also have to make sure that you're doing all of these others. And some of the strategies that I'm going to talk about next week are that how you ask for money and how you invite people to give and how you make those decisions about what you're going to do undesignated and how many special projects you could raise money for. So it all kind of ties in together. And part of it too, though, is making sure that people know and share those stories about what happens with their gifts. Because even if we, teach tithing, for example, and everyone was giving 10% of their income to God's mission, doesn't mean they have to give to the church. If they don't think the church is open and transparent with those gifts and knows what they're doing and is actually going to have an impact, and we haven't shared what's going to happen with those gifts, people won't give. If we say share, this is what's going to happen, this is what's doing, people will step up and give. And that's the same. I don't like sharing deficit budgets, but I love sharing needs, and I love to invite people to give according to what they have to give and participate in God's mission. If we've done all of that, if we've used abundance language, and we also have to be at peace and say, sometimes there's too many other things going on, who knows, in the community or whatever, and that's at the point we have many churches talk about amalgamating or dissolving or whatever, like if you get to the point. But if you've poured your heart in it, you felt like we've tried all of these, we've implemented those, and we still just, for whatever reason, don't have enough people coming, we just can't keep it together, then at that point we have to say, okay, what else is going on here, or what else do we need to do?
Okay, thanks.
That was a great question, by the way. Thank you. I often will take questions like those and I'm like, oh yes, gonna incorporate that into my next presentation. All right. I see that we have 3 minutes left, and I've never heard a Presbyterian who doesn't like it when a meeting finishes early, if not on time. So I'm going to invite you to email any questions that you have in that you don't think I covered, or that you want me to cover more in depth. And next month when we meet again, I'll be sure to answer those questions. And other than that, I'm also happy just to have one-on-one conversations to talk about specific issues in your church. I'm Karen Plater. Maggie is the one who is helping me with our questions. She's the gifts administrator at the PCC, and we're always here to help.